What happens when a civilization believes its rulers are gods, not metaphorically, literally, when a king steps onto a mountaintop, declares himself divine, and the world listens? In the shadowed jungles of Cambodia, a lost empire once bent rivers to its will, carved mountains into temples, and raised cities larger than any in medieval Europe. Its name was Angkor. Its people were the Khmer, and at its peak, it ruled over millions. But how did they build a city of stone in a sea of forest? Why did they align their temples with the stars? How could an empire so advanced, so precise, vanish into the trees? Today, its monuments remain. Angkor Wat, Bayon, Prohm, silent, majestic, wrapped in vines and memory. But behind their beauty lies something deeper, a mystery of sacred waters, of vanished roads, of faces in towers who still seem to watch. In this expedition, we will follow the trail of the God Kings. We will climb the sacred mountain where it all began. We will step inside temples overtaken by roots, walk roads that no longer appear on maps, and ask the questions that history never answered. Because the Khmer Empire was more than a civilization, it was a statement. And somewhere in the dust, the silence, and the stone, it still speaks. The rain had just stopped when I found the road. Not a road as we know them. No pavement, no signage. Just a scar across the jungle, too deliberate to be anything else. The earth beneath my boots was soft with decades of monsoon, yet still firm, as if the land itself remembered being shaped. I was in the northern reaches of Cambodia, skirting the outer rim of what maps call the Greater Angkor region. But maps lie. This place, this corridor carved through underbrush and time, was not marked. Not anymore. It was the way the vines parted, the way the trees bent back, like something had once moved through here, something massive, something sacred. And then I saw it, laterite, a reddish stone, almost metallic, dense with iron, carefully laid blocks, some fractured, others still interlocked like a spine running toward the horizon. It ran perfectly straight, not for meters, for kilometers. No village nearby, no reason for it to exist, unless it had always existed. This was not a trail used by farmers or hunters. This was an artery, a royal road, cut through dense forest by hands long gone, engineered to defy nature's chaos with human order. The Khmer were speaking to me, not in words but in architecture. Their confidence echoed through this path. They had not built it to serve the land. They had made the land serve them. I ran my fingers along the edge of one sunken stone. It was smooth in places, worn by centuries of footsteps, cartwheels, perhaps even kings. The jungle was loud, the hum of insects, the distant calls of birds, the drip of leaves still heavy from the storm. But under it all was a silence, a kind of waiting. You could almost hear the caravan bells. Centuries ago, this road would have been busy. Elephants loaded with spices, silk, copper, monks walking barefoot, soldiers with lances resting on shoulders, couriers delivering orders from the God King himself. And yet, now, nothing but moss and shadow. I followed the trail deeper beneath arching canopies, past tree roots that had cracked the stones like the ribs of a buried skeleton. At some places, the forest had entirely swallowed the way. I had to climb, crawl, guess. But every time I thought I had lost it, the road returned. Always straight, always forward. Later, I would learn that this was part of the ancient highway system, roads that once connected Angkor to distant provinces and sacred sites. Hundreds of kilometers of infrastructure, built not with machines, but with muscle and vision, maintained by will. They called it the Mandala of the mountains, an empire not just of temples, but of movement, every road a declaration, every path a thread in the vast web of power that radiated from Angkor's heart. What we forget is that an empire is not just its monuments, it is its arteries, its flow, its rhythm. The Khmer understood this. Before they built their temples, they built their roads. Because before they could rule the heavens, they had to master the earth. Standing there, boots wet, hands muddy, I felt the pulse of that ancient rhythm. Not just a forgotten highway, but a statement that we were here, that we mattered, that this world bent once to our design. And then, as if answering my thoughts, the clouds broke, and sunlight pierced through the trees. The road lit up, stone by stone, as if to remind me this was only the beginning. I arrived at the West Pyre just before dawn. The air was cool. Mist skimmed the surface like a breath held too long. Birds moved in low, silent patterns overhead. The water stretched before me like an inland sea, still, endless, waiting. But this was no lake carved by nature. This was human. I stood on its southern embankment, where engineers 1,000 years ago had moved mountains with their bare hands. The Khmer had reshaped the land, inch by inch, stone by stone, to hold water, to hold life. The West Pyre is over 8 kilometers long and more than 2 kilometers wide. It is one of the largest man-made reservoirs in the ancient world. The scale is almost impossible to grasp until you see it for yourself. This was not just about irrigation. It was about divinity. Water was more than a resource to the Khmer. It was a bridge between worlds, a sacred element, a channel of rebirth. And so they built not just for survival, but for cosmology. The Pyre was aligned with the heavens. Its waters mirrored the sky. Temples sat at its center as if floating between realms. I traced my hand along the laterite wall, worn and sun-baked. It still held firm after centuries of rain and heat. And I realized something. This was not just infrastructure. This was faith, cast in earth and stone. At the height of their power, the Khmer did what few others dared. They mastered the monsoon. They built vast networks of canals, moats, spillways, and basins that could capture and redirect the seasonal floods. When rains came, they stored the excess. When droughts followed, they released it. The fields never dried. The rice never failed. Rice, their true currency, their lifeblood. A crop that required rhythm, precision, timing. And with it came power. This system allowed them to feed 1 million people across a sprawling empire. It sustained massive cities like Angkor Thom. It supported armies, artisans, and astronomers. It was the secret beneath their temples, the invisible force behind their stone. And yet, that morning by the water, I noticed the cracks. Some channels were silted shut. Some embankments had caved. What had once been precise now looked chaotic. Vines coiled through the foundations. Birds nested in places where priests once bathed. It made me wonder, when did control slip? Not all declines come from outside. Sometimes they seep in, slow and silent, through the very systems that once ensured survival. Climate data now tells us the region faced erratic weather during the empire's final centuries. First, flooding rains, then devastating droughts. The reservoirs could not adjust fast enough. The canals clogged, the fields dried, the rhythm broke. And when the rice failed, everything else followed. That morning, I knelt beside the water's edge. I touched the surface. It was warm. quiet, but below it lay centuries of human intention. This was no simple ruin. It was a memory pool, a mirror of ambition, of order, of belief that man could bend the earth to his will and ask the heavens to wait. The Khmer did not fall in a single moment. Their decline was not a loud collapse. It was a soft unraveling, felt first in the flow of water and the silence of empty fields. But even now, in the hush of morning light, the beret remains, a sea built by forgotten hands, a reservoir of both life and warning. The climb began in silence. Mist drifted through the treetops like spirits reluctant to leave. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone, crushed leaves, and something older, the smell of time itself. I was ascending Mount Kulen. To many, it is just a ridge in northern Cambodia, easily lost among taller peaks. But to the Khmer, this mountain was sacred ground, not merely elevated earth, but the cradle of kingship, the beginning of everything. The forest thickened as I moved higher. My guide had stopped at a weathered shrine halfway up. He offered incense to the ancestors and gestured for me to continue alone. He would not go further. They say Mount Kulen is alive, that its stones remember, that its rivers carry blessings and its trees guard old secrets. I believed them. Hours later, as the sun began to break through the canopy, I reached the riverbed, and there, beneath only an inch of flowing water, I saw them. Linga, dozens, then hundreds, carved directly into the rock beneath the stream, each one a symbol of creation, of divine energy, of kingship made manifest through stone and water. This was the Valley of 1,000 Lingas, a sacred river where every ripple passed over symbols of the god Shiva, meant to bless the waters before they reached the fields below. Here, religion and engineering merged. Nature and divinity became one. But these carvings were not just acts of faith. They were proclamations. It was here, sometime around the year 802, that a man named Jayavarman II declared himself Chakravartin, the universal ruler, not merely king, but God on earth. His coronation did not take place in a palace, but on this mountain, beneath the sky. Within the embrace of sacred land, he founded what would become the Khmer Empire. And by choosing Mount Kulen, he was saying something powerful, that his authority was not inherited, not granted by other men, but drawn directly from the cosmos. I sat by the river, the water cold against my fingers. Each linga was carefully shaped, worn smooth by centuries of flow. This was not ceremonial, it was functional, living, eternal. Jayavarman's choice of this mountain was strategic as much as spiritual. Kulen provided high ground, a vantage point, control over the rivers that fed the plains. It was a natural fortress and a holy one. By controlling the mountain, he controlled not just the landscape, but the narrative. He was not just a ruler of land, he was the mediator between heaven and earth. As I explored deeper, I found sandstone blocks scattered in the underbrush, the remnants of ancient temples now choked by roots and vines. One structure still held its form, a shrine to Shiva, now empty, its idol long removed, but the feeling remained. Presence, a weight in the air, the sense that something once immense had passed through here and maybe never truly left. This was where empire began, not in the marble halls of a capital, but in the humid quiet of a mountaintop river, beneath the eyes of gods and the patience of trees. Mount Kulen is more than a birthplace, it is a threshold. Here, Jayavarman crossed from man into myth. Here, the Khmer crossed from scattered polities into a vision of empire that would last for centuries. The jungle has softened the edges, the river has worn down the stone, but nothing has erased the declaration made on this mountain. We are divine, we are eternal, we begin here. The sun had barely risen when I found it, a fragment of stone, half buried, cracked, weathered, almost illegible, but the script, it was unmistakable. Ancient Khmer, flowing like water down the face of the stele. I had seen others like it before, but this one was different. It spoke of Jayavarman II, of the mountain, of the gods, and of something else, something rarely said so plainly. Devaraja, the god who was king, or perhaps the king who was God. The concept was more than belief. It was a declaration, a foundation stone upon which an entire empire was built, not with borders and armies, but with faith, with cosmic authority. In the early 9th century, when Jayavarman stood on Mount Kulen and performed the ritual of kingship, he was not just unifying lands, he was unifying heaven and earth. The Devaraja cult was born that day. It was not a religion in the way we understand it. It was a political theology, a sacred order, a system that said the ruler was no longer just human. He was the earthly incarnation of Shiva, the supreme god of creation and destruction. Jayavarman did not claim descent from a line of noble ancestors. He claimed a direct link to the divine, and that changed everything. In the temples he commissioned, we see the shift. No longer were gods the central figures. Now the king stood at the heart. His deeds were etched into stone beside the epics of the Mahabharata. His likeness appeared in the posture of deities. His legacy was immortalized not in tombs, but in living temples. This was more than ego, it was strategy. By binding the monarchy to the divine, Jayavarman ensured loyalty that reached beyond fear or law. To serve the king was to serve the gods. To question the king was heresy. I wandered through the ruins of an early temple believed to have honored this cult. The floor was broken, columns tilted, but the altar stood firm. At its center would have once rested a linga, the symbol of Shiva and the symbolic presence of the king. Each ruler after Jayavarman would reaffirm the Devaraja right. Each would build, not just in honor of gods, but in honor of themselves as gods. This belief fueled the explosion of temple construction, hydraulic mastery, and cultural ambition that defined the Khmer Empire's golden age. But as I walked among those stones, I could not help but feel the weight of such a claim. What happens to a people when their leader claims divinity? When temples become instruments of statecraft? When belief becomes law? It creates unity, but also vulnerability. Because when crops fail, when wars are lost, when rivers dry and forests rise, it is not just a king who is questioned, it is a god, and gods are not supposed to fall. But here, in this silent ruin, they had. The linga was gone, the altar empty, the roof open to sky and rain. Time had reclaimed what belief once protected. Still, the idea of Devaraja did not vanish. It passed like fire from king to king, igniting ambition, shaping stone, commanding loyalty. It made the Khmer Empire possible, and perhaps it made its fall inevitable. I stood in the shadow of the altar and felt it, the echo of a decree spoken over 1,000 years ago. Not in voice, but in architecture. Not in conquest, but in conviction. I am not just king. I am the bridge between heaven and earth. The towers rose before me like a vision drawn from some deeper dream. Angkor Wat, carved from sandstone and myth, stood silent against the early morning sky. Its silhouette mirrored the sacred mountains of Meru, the celestial axis in Hindu cosmology. And yet, it felt more than sacred. It felt calculated, precise, eternal. I crossed the causeway slowly, each step a passage not just across a moat, but across centuries. The air was heavy with the scent of dew-soaked stone and faint incense burned by unseen pilgrims. The walls were cool under my fingers, still breathing the night. This was no ordinary temple. This was a riddle in stone. Built in the 12th century by King Jayavarman II, Angkor Wat is the largest religious monument ever constructed by human hands. Its scale defies logic. Its details challenge belief. 5 towers, shaped like lotus buds, rise from a series of concentric galleries. From above, the temple resembles a mandala, a sacred diagram of the universe. And yet, despite its grandeur, questions linger. Why was it built facing west? Nearly all Khmer temples align to the east, toward the rising sun, toward beginnings. But Angkor Wat turns toward sunset, toward endings, toward death. Some believe it was meant to serve as Jayavarman's final resting place, a temple tomb that would guide his soul beyond the veil. Others argue it was a cosmic observatory, a celestial machine designed to map time itself. The truth may be both, or something more. As I wandered deeper into the temple, light poured through narrow windows and danced along bas-reliefs that ran for hundreds of meters. Armies marched in eternal procession. Gods battled demons in the churning of the sea of milk. The king himself appeared in divine form, presiding over it all. But these stories were not random. They unfolded with purpose, in order, in rhythm, each scene positioned with astronomical precision. Scholars have discovered that solstices and equinoxes cast shadows through the temple in alignment with specific carvings. The very stones mark time like the gears of an ancient clock. It was as if Jayavarman had built a map for the soul, a path from this world into the next, written not in ink, but in architecture. And yet, something else haunts Angkor Wat. Despite its scale and beauty, it was never replicated. No other temple in the Khmer world mirrors its perfection. No later king dared to match it, and its builder, Jayavarman II, left behind no heirs strong enough to preserve his legacy. Was this temple his triumph or his epitaph? I sat beneath one of the lotus towers and looked up. The stone seemed to shimmer, not with magic, but with memory. It held a silence too deep to break. Angkor Wat was not built to be visited. It was built to be journeyed. Each corridor, each carving, each step carries you closer to something unknowable. You do not leave it the same. To call it a temple is not enough. It is a question carved in stone, a vision of the universe, a funeral pyre lit not with fire, but with geometry, devotion, and the will to be remembered. Perhaps that is why it endures. Not just because it was built well, but because it was built with the belief that death is not an end, it is a passage, and Angkor Wat is the road. Their names were never carved into stone. No statue bears their faces. No inscription sings their praise. Yet without them, the towers would never have risen. The gods would never have found their earthly homes. I am speaking of the builders, the thousands of hands that shaped the Khmer Empire, stone by stone, breath by breath. Their fingerprints are everywhere, though their stories have vanished into silence. One morning, I followed a temple wall being slowly consumed by moss. As I traced the carvings, I found them chisel marks left behind like whispers. Some were straight and confident, others were hesitant, curved. like the hand that carved them was tired or young. It was not just kings and priests who built these wonders. It was stonemasons, quarrymen, cart drivers, rope pullers, scaffold climbers, women pounding rice in camps along the jungle's edge, children carrying buckets of water, monks reciting mantras to bless each foundation. And still, we do not know their names. At the quarries near Mount Kulen, blocks of sandstone were cut with astonishing precision, moved across rivers and forests, hauled for kilometers on bamboo sleds, dragged over rollers, lifted into place without the machines we now take for granted, and all of it done in silence. These were not slaves as once believed. Evidence now suggests they were skilled laborers, organized into guilds, experts in their craft, passing knowledge through generations, bound not just by duty, but by devotion. Because building a temple was not just work, it was merit, a way to earn favor in this life and the next. To carve a linga, or place a stone in the temple of a god king, was to take part in something larger than yourself, a sacred act that echoed across lifetimes. I imagine them, these builders, working from dawn until dusk in heat and monsoon, singing songs to keep rhythm, arguing over lines and angles, laughing during breaks in the shade, lighting lamps when the sun failed, determined to finish what must be done. They did not dream of glory. They dreamt of stability, of good harvests, of protection for their families. And yet, by serving the empire, they created monuments that still defy time. Their fingerprints remain on every tower. Their sweat darkens the stones we now admire. I once came across a carving half hidden near the base of a gallery. Not a god, not a king, but a man, crouched, holding a chisel. His face was rough, the lines hurried, almost hidden, as if a mason had carved himself into the corner of the world he helped build. A quiet rebellion, a last attempt at remembrance. That image stayed with me, because history remembers the visionaries, the rulers, the divine, but it forgets the ones who laid the foundation, the ones who mixed the mortar, who set the scaffolding, who turned vision into reality. Without them, the Khmer Empire would never have touched the sky. And so, in this journal of lost epochs, I light a small fire for them, the invisible ones, the unnamed artisans of Angkor. They may not have ruled, but they made the stones speak. And because of them, we still listen. The jungle was quiet when I stepped into the clearing, and there it was, Bayon. Unlike Angkor Wat, which greets the world with symmetry and solemnity, Bayon seems to rise suddenly, unexpectedly, like a dream remembered in fragments. Its towers emerge from the earth like forgotten thoughts, each crowned with a face smiling. Not just one or two, but dozens. Massive stone faces, carved on all four sides of each tower, looking out in every direction, serene, unblinking, watching. They do not threaten, they do not command, they simply observe, and their smile, subtle, knowing, eternal, is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. I wandered beneath them, the light shifting through the cracks in stone, dappling the worn pathways below. No two expressions are exactly alike. Some tilt slightly, as if amused. Others gaze down in contemplation. Together, they create a mood not of awe, but of intimacy. You feel seen. Bayon was built at the heart of Angkor Thom by King Jayavarman VII in the late 12th century, a Buddhist king in a land shaped by Hindu cosmology. His reign marked a turning point, one of great expansion, great suffering, and great change. And Bayon was his message to the world. But what was he trying to say? Some scholars argue the faces represent Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, whose gentle presence brings peace to all realms. Others suggest they are the king himself, deified in stone, watching over his people in every direction. Perhaps they are both. Perhaps they are neither. The truth may rest somewhere between God and man, between prayer and power. As I climbed the narrow stairs to the upper terrace, I felt their gaze more intensely. It was not oppressive, it was calming, like the presence of an old teacher or a guardian who knows more than they say. In the inner galleries, long bas-reliefs unfold stories in endless detail, battles against the Cham, market scenes, coronations, even glimpses of everyday life. Fishermen pulling nets, mothers cradling infants, soldiers cooking meals. It is as if Bayon wanted to contain all of life, the sacred and the mundane, the epic and the ordinary, and place it under the watch of those eternal faces. But time has not been kind. Bayon's towers lean, stones have fallen, trees creep close, their roots testing the edges. And yet the faces endure, weathered but intact, their smiles untouched by rain or war or neglect. I once stood motionless for nearly an hour beneath the tallest tower, watching the light shift across one particular face. As the sun moved, so did the expression, from calm to amused, from detached to gently sad. It was a trick of shadow, perhaps, or maybe it was something more. Bayon does not speak loudly. It does not try to impress with size or symmetry. It whispers instead, through its faces, through its silence. It tells us that leadership can be watchful, not loud, that wisdom does not need words, that compassion, true compassion, is a quiet presence in all directions. The faces of Bayon do not ask to be understood, they only ask to be remembered. And in remembering them, we begin to understand a little more about the king who dared to build them, and perhaps a little more about ourselves. The forest swallowed the road long ago, but beyond the trees a wall appeared, immense, square, and silent. Ivy crawled across its surface, vines hung like curtains from its heights, and through the southern gate of Angkor Thom, I entered a city lost in time. Not just a city of temples, a city of people. Angkor Thom means great city, and it was precisely that. Spanning over 9 square kilometers, it was once the beating heart of the Khmer Empire, home to more than 1 million souls, a population unmatched anywhere else on Earth at the time. Even now, its layout remains visible from the air, a perfect square surrounded by walls encircled by a vast moat, a city planned with intention, with symmetry, with cosmic alignment. At the center stood Bayon, the Temple of Faces, built by King Jayavarman VII. But the city stretched far beyond its stone cordon. There were roads, markets, hospitals, monasteries, wooden houses now long decayed, wells dug into the earth, stone foundations for granaries and warehouses. The ruins are scattered, subtle but everywhere. And beneath my feet, hidden beneath centuries of soil, lies an invisible grid, a network of canals, ponds, and drainage systems. The city breathed with water. It was a living organism, designed to move, to grow, to endure. Angkor Thom was not built in haste, it was imagined. Its gates, each crowned with the watchful faces of Bayon, aligned to the cardinal directions. The city itself reflected sacred geography. Every axis, every pathway was a thread in a cosmic web. The center of the empire was also the center of the universe. But what struck me most was the human scale of it. Among the ruins, I found pottery shards, rice grinders, pieces of jewelry, a worn ivory comb, not relics of royalty, but echoes of ordinary lives. Families, children, traders, and pilgrims, people who lived not in temples, but in wooden houses now reclaimed by trees. Angkor Thom was a spiritual capital, yes, but also an economic and social one. A crossroads of trade and culture, a place where sacred rituals met the hum of daily life, and it was crowded. 1 million people, an empire pulsing through narrow streets and open courtyards, elephants moving beside monks, artisans carving beside market stalls, smoke from cook fires rising into the same sky as temple incense. Yet now, it is quiet. Only the sound of wind through trees, the occasional call of a bird, and my footsteps crunching over the forgotten threshold of a wooden home that once held a family. What happened to them? The city did not fall in flames. It faded, slowly, gradually, like a tide pulling away from shore. Droughts weakened the water systems. Invasions fractured the borders. The divine kingship lost its hold, and the forest returned. But even in ruin, Angkor Thom resists oblivion. Its walls still stand. Its towers still rise. Its layout still reveals the mind of a civilization that did not just worship the gods, but sought to live among them. And in walking its quiet streets, I felt it not a ghost city, but a sleeping one, a place that remembers, a place where 1 million lives once moved together in rhythm with stars and seasons. And though their voices have faded, the city still breathes, stone by stone, root by root, waiting to be heard again. I watched it happen in silence. A single root, thick as a serpent, had split a sandstone block clean in two. The wall was no match. Not after centuries of rain, wind, and waiting. The jungle had returned, and it had not come with fury. It had come with patience. The Khmer Empire once held dominion over land, water, and sky. They redirected rivers, leveled forests, built cities that could feed 1 million mouths. But they did not defeat the jungle. They only delayed it. Now, the vines have crept back, not all at once, but slowly, inch by inch, in the way moss softens a sharp edge, in the way fig roots find a crack and grow until the stone surrenders, in the way silence takes the place of bells. The siege was never declared. It began the moment the last stone was laid. At temples like Prohm and Bang Mielia, nature and architecture have fused into something almost otherworldly. Trees burst from rooftops. Roots hang down like drapery. Whole towers lean into the forest as if returning home. And yet, this is not destruction. It is reclamation. The jungle does not hate. It does not punish. It simply persists. The Khmer had once believed they could order the world through canals, temples, rituals, and roads. But nature plays a longer game. She watches, she waits, and when power falters, she moves in. What strikes me most is how beautiful the ruins have become. They are not just broken, they are transformed. A strangler fig weaving through a gallery is not just decay, it is poetry. A vine wrapping around a lintel becomes a signature of time. Each ruin is a canvas painted by two artists, the human hand and the hand of the earth. I once sat beneath a collapsed tower, its stones now blanketed in ferns. Insects buzzed, a monkey barked in the distance, and I realized that nothing was truly lost here, only changed. The empire did not vanish, it dissolved, like a sandcastle at high tide, and in that dissolution, the jungle found her voice again. But this story is not just about the past, it is a warning. What the Khmer built was magnificent, but it was also fragile, dependent on balance of water, of power, of belief. When that balance faltered, when the rains changed and the kings lost their divine grip, the jungle did what it always does. She returned. Quietly, completely. Today, modern archaeologists fight a different kind of battle. LiDAR scans reveal hidden cities beneath the canopy. Stone roads still trace lines through the forest floor. But with every discovery, they also find more evidence of how quickly nature can erase, how vines can outlast kings. I walked a causeway once, its stones cracked and uneven. Trees leaned in on both sides, casting shadows like curtains. The air was thick with moisture and memory. No sounds but my own breath and the distant call of birds. It felt less like a ruin and more like a secret. The jungle has not just taken back the temples, she has woven them into her story. One of endurance, of rhythm, of inevitability. And as I left that place, stepping back into the world of roads and noise, I carried with me a truth that echoes still. Civilizations rise with ambition, but they fall with time, and the jungle always waits. The carving stretched nearly 50 meters along the temple wall. Dozens of figures, gods and demons, locked in an eternal tug-of-war. Their hands gripped the coils of a massive serpent, their feet braced against waves. And at the center, calm amid the chaos, stood Vishnu. This was not just a story. This was a blueprint. The churning of the Sea of Milk is one of the great creation myths in Hindu tradition, a tale of gods and demons working together to churn the cosmic ocean, seeking the nectar of immortality. But here in Angkor, carved into the walls of Angkor Wat and echoed throughout the empire's temples, it became more than mythology. It became governance. It became identity. The Khmer kings understood that stories do not just explain the world, they shape it. They justify power. They turn thrones into sacred seats and rulers into divine necessity. In the myth, Vishnu orchestrates the churning. The serpent Vasuki becomes the rope. Mount Mandala the churning stick. From the struggle emerges more than nectar. Celestial beings, treasures. It is a myth of cosmic cooperation and calculated hierarchy. And the kings saw themselves as the Vishnu of their time, the calm center of an unstable world, the only figure capable of uniting opposing forces, priests and soldiers, builders and farmers, the elite and the ordinary. To rule an empire, they wrapped themselves in myth. And this carving, stretching across the southern gallery of Angkor Wat, told every visitor that the king was no mere man. He was the stabilizer of heaven and earth, the reason chaos had not yet swallowed the world. I stood before the relief as light filtered through the columns. The figures had been softened by centuries of weather, but their power remained. The demons strained with ferocity. The gods pulled with divine grace. Every muscle carved with intention. Every expression captured mid-movement. This was not decoration, it was declaration. Even the act of walking along the corridor became symbolic. As I moved through the scene, I became part of the story. I walked from chaos to clarity, from struggle to balance, just as the Empire asked its people to do. But myth as statecraft comes with risk. When rulers claim divine origin, when they say their right to govern is written in the stars, they also tether themselves to those myths. And when storms come, drought, invasion, rebellion, the story begins to crack. Because if the king is Vishnu, why has the water dried? Why do enemies breach the gates? Why does the cosmic order feel broken? Stories give power, but they also demand belief, and belief, once shaken, is hard to restore. I left the gallery and looked back at the churning scene. The serpent still twisted, the gods still pulled, but time had worn the details. Lichen crept along the base, cracks traced across the surface. The story was still there, but it was fading, and yet I could not deny its power. Even now, centuries later, the relief still spoke, still inspired awe, still wrapped me in its rhythm. That is the brilliance of the Khmer vision. They did not just rule, they wrote themselves into eternity. And if we listen closely, those stories still echo, in stone, in silence, in the pull between memory and myth. Prohm does not wait for you. It greets you with silence, with roots the size of elephants and stones scattered like fallen stars. It is not a ruin that invites understanding. It is a place that asks you to feel before you think. The jungle does not just surround Prohm, it lives within it. Silk cotton trees erupt from temple towers. Banyan roots pour down walls like molten rock. Doors open into chambers filled with shadow and light, but also stillness. This is where the forest and the sacred have made a pact. The temple was built in the late 12th century by King Jayavarman VII. Unlike many other structures dedicated to gods or victories, Prohm was a monument to love and memory. It was created in honor of the king's mother, not as a mere shrine, but as a living monastery, once home to thousands of monks, teachers, and attendants. Her name is lost to history, but her presence remains. As I wandered its halls, I could feel the intimacy of the place. Not grand in the way of Angkor Wat, but personal. The carvings are gentle, the scale human, a sanctuary more than a symbol. But the jungle had other plans. Unlike other temples that were cleared and restored, Prohm was left largely as it was found, entangled, swallowed, sleeping. The decision was deliberate, a way to preserve the mystery, to let nature speak as loudly as stone, and it does. Roots wrap around columns like arms around a memory. Trees stand atop walls as if claiming ancestry. Green moss covers inscriptions once carved with reverence. It is beautiful, but it is also uneasy, because here you see what time truly looks like. You see how quickly the line between construction and collapse can blur. Prohm was once a city in itself, with over 3,000 villages under its spiritual care, supported by rice fields, workshops, and reservoirs. It was not just a temple, it was a world, and now that world is hollow. Chambers echo with nothing but wind. Doorways lead to collapsed galleries. The vines do not knock, they enter freely. But somehow, that is the gift of this place. You feel the impermanence. You feel the humility beneath all human ambition. And yet, there is also grace. The roots do not destroy, they cradle. They hold the temple as if unwilling to let it go. I paused in one corridor where the roots formed an archway above me. Light trickled through the canopy in long golden threads. Dust danced in the air, and I realized this was still sacred ground. Not because it was built that way, but because time had made it so. In Prohm, there is no illusion of control. There is only balance. The harmony between the things we build and the things we cannot stop, between memory and erosion. between love and loss. Jayavarman may have built this temple for his mother, but the forest adopted it. And now it belongs to something greater. I left Prohm without speaking, not because there was nothing to say, but because some places speak better in silence. And in that silence I heard it, the breath of roots, the patience of stone, and the echo of a king's devotion still held gently in the arms of the trees. The walls of Bante Chmar do not rise like those of Angkor Wat. They lean, cracked, and overgrown, their carvings softened by time. And yet, as I traced my fingers across the bas-reliefs, I felt a different kind of energy. Not the serenity of divinity, but the tension of war. This was not myth, this was memory. The Cham Wars were not just battles over territory, they were a confrontation with destiny. A moment when the Khmer Empire, proud and divine, saw the first visible fractures in its own story. The Cham, a seafaring people from what is now central Vietnam, were longtime rivals of the Khmer. There had been raids and skirmishes before, but in the late 12th century something changed. They struck not just at the borders, but at the heart. In the year 1177, Cham forces sailed up the Mekong and attacked Angkor itself. They succeeded. They burned parts of the capital, they took the city. It was the unthinkable. The empire of god kings, rulers who claimed divine sanction, had been humiliated. The narrative that the king was chosen by the heavens was cracked, if not shattered. How could the Devaraja protect the cosmos if he could not protect his own throne? In the wake of this catastrophe rose Jayavarman VII. He would become one of the most prolific builders, the most visionary rulers, and one of the most complex figures in Khmer history. But his ascent began in blood. He fought the Cham with fire and fury, leading campaigns to push them back. The reliefs at Bante Chmar and the Bayon tell of his victories in great detail. Rows of soldiers with curved swords, archers in boats, the chaos of battle captured in stone. But look closer, and you see something else: exhaustion. The eyes of the warriors do not shine with triumph. They are wide, startled, human. The faces of the fallen are twisted in anguish. This was not a war of expansion, it was a war of survival, and its cost was great. The Cham were eventually repelled. Jayavarman was crowned king. He would go on to build Angkor Thom, Bayon, Prohm, monuments of strength, compassion, and spiritual depth. But the scars of war never truly faded. The very act of rebuilding became a response to collapse, a way to restore not just cities, but belief itself. Temples rose where blood had been spilled. Hospitals and rest houses were established across the empire, as if to heal what war had broken, and yet the cracks remained. The Cham invasion had shown the people that kings could bleed, that god kings could fall, and once the illusion of invincibility is pierced, it never fully returns. I walked the outer galleries of Bante Chmar at dusk. The wind moved through the ruins like a breath. The carvings seemed to shimmer in the changing light. Warriors forever frozen in motion, an empire forever caught between triumph and fragility. Jayavarman's reign was brilliant, but it came from fire, and from that fire rose a question that would echo through the centuries. What happens when the gods lose their shield, when the divine fails to deliver? The Cham Wars did not end the Khmer Empire, but they changed it. They exposed the tension between myth and reality, between the perfection of temples and the chaos of the battlefield, between the stories rulers told and the truths they could not escape. The mandate may have survived, but it no longer felt divine. It was a dry season when I walked the banks of an ancient canal near Angkor Thom. The stones were exposed, pale under the sun. The water that once flowed through these veins of the empire had long since receded. What remained was silence and questions. The Khmer Empire was built on water, not just symbolically, but physically, spiritually, economically. It was their lifeblood. The vast barrages, canals, moats, and reservoirs formed one of the most sophisticated hydraulic networks the ancient world had ever seen. But even the most intricate machine can break, and in the end, it was not an army or a rebellion that brought Angkor to its knees. It was the sky. For centuries, the Khmer had engineered a delicate balance. They captured the monsoon rains, stored them in vast reservoirs like the West Barre, and released them during dry months to feed the rice fields. The entire empire pulsed with the rhythm of water. But nature is not predictable. Climate records drawn from tree rings and sediment cores tell a sobering story. Between the 13th and 15th centuries, the region was struck by massive swings in climate. First decades of intense flooding, then prolonged droughts. The system that once ensured prosperity now became a trap. During the floods, canals were overwhelmed. Embankments collapsed, reservoirs silted up. Then the droughts came and there was no water to feed the fields. Rice yields fell, hunger spread. Faith in the king and in the divine order he was supposed to uphold began to fracture. I stood at the edge of a crumbling spillway. Lichen covered the stone, and small trees had taken root in the cracks. Once, this structure would have carefully measured the flow of water into the city's core. Now, it was little more than a monument to what once worked. The fall of Angkor was not a sudden collapse. It was an unraveling, a slow suffocation of systems too large to adapt. As the climate shifted, the empire's lifeline turned brittle. The cities emptied, temples were abandoned. The jungle began its quiet return. And yet, the temples themselves still stood. The stone did not fail. The faith did not vanish. What fell was the infrastructure that connected it all, the invisible web of water, labor, and timing that held the empire together. Some scholars now believe that the Khmer engineers even tried to adapt. They built new channels, altered spillways, tried to adjust to the changing rains, but it was too little or too late. The changes came faster than tradition could follow. It makes you wonder, how does a civilization so advanced, so prepared, find itself undone? The answer is not arrogance, it is reliance. When the Khmer built their world around water, they made themselves vulnerable to its disappearance. As I watched the wind stir dry leaves across the old canal bed, I imagined what it once looked like, full and flowing, lined with life, echoing with the voices of workers, traders, priests. Now there was only wind, but even in its absence, the water had left its mark. In the layout of the cities, in the carvings of nagas and rain-bringing deities, in the memory of a people who once bent rivers to their will. The fall of Angkor was not the end of a culture, it was the end of a balance, and a reminder that even the most powerful civilizations remain at the mercy of the skies. The jungle was thicker here, not wild in the way of untouched forest, but tangled, like something trying to cover its tracks. The path I followed was barely visible, a line of compacted earth scattered with laterite blocks, half swallowed by moss and root. But it was there, a road, straight, deliberate, ancient. Long before modern highways and satellite maps, the Khmer Empire stitched its territories together with an intricate web of roads. These were not rough tracks. They were engineered with care, elevated, drained, sometimes even paved. They connected cities, ports, temples, and provinces. And they carried more than goods. They carried faith. Along these roads walked pilgrims and merchants, soldiers and monks. They stretched from the heart of Angkor to far-flung borderlands, weaving an empire into something more than geography, into a shared identity. I followed one such path heading west from Angkor Thom. It had no signpost, no clear beginning, but it carried the shape of movement. Beneath the forest canopy, the air was still and heavy, broken only by the buzz of insects and the soft crunch of my footsteps. Now and then I found traces, a carved milestone, half buried, the crumbling foundation of a rest house, fragments of pottery worn smooth by time and weather. These were the edges of something vast, an invisible network that had once pulsed with life. The roads may have faded, but their memory lingered in the stones. Jayavarman VII, the same king who built Bayon and Prohm, is said to have ordered the construction of over 100 rest houses along these roads, each spaced a day's journey apart, not just for convenience, but for purpose. Because these were not just trade routes, they were spiritual journeys. Pilgrims traveling to sacred mountains or holy temples needed shelter, food, guidance, and so the empire provided. The state and the sacred walked hand in hand. I imagined those travelers, dusty from the road, heads bowed in prayer, eyes fixed on the horizon. I imagined the conversations held around fire pits in the rest houses, the songs sung beneath starlight, the fears and hopes carried between footsteps. And then I imagined their silence, because now the roads carry no voices, only wind, only the rustle of leaves across old stones. But they are not gone. In recent years, archaeologists using LiDAR, laser scanning technology, have uncovered vast networks of roads and water channels hidden beneath the forest floor. They were always there, just waiting for someone to look deeper. It is easy to think of Angkor as a collection of temples, but the empire was more than stone. It was movement. It was connection. It was the daily rhythm of people moving across landscapes that believed in something greater than themselves. I paused at the base of a worn stone marker. No inscriptions remained, but I felt its weight, its presence, as if it still stood to tell the traveler, you are not lost, you are on the path, even if the destination is forgotten. Ghost roads, pilgrim paths. They remind us that the past does not just live in monuments, it lives in motion, in the places between places, in the journey itself. And though time may erase the footsteps, the road still remembers. In a quiet gallery of the National Museum in Phnom Penh, I found her, a dancing apsara, carved in sandstone, suspended in a movement she never finished. One arm raised, one foot lifted, a smile softening her lips. Her eyes did not look at me. They looked through me, as if she still remembered a world I could only imagine. The Khmer Empire has long since fallen, its capitals abandoned, its kings lost to time, but its spirit never vanished. It endured in stone, not just in temples, but in fragments, in statues, lintels, and lintel-less doorways, in broken inscriptions and weathered carvings, each one a breath held longer than any civilization should have been able to manage. Because the Khmer were not just builders of empire, they were builders of memory. Even after Angkor was deserted, its monuments stood as sacred spaces. Local communities continued to worship there. Monks lit incense in cracked shrines. Pilgrims walked barefoot through overgrown corridors. The stones did not sleep. They adapted, and the world did not forget them. When early European explorers stumbled upon the ruins in the 19th century, they spoke of a lost civilization. But it was not lost. It had simply changed forms, moved from cities into spirit, from palaces into stories, from records into rhythm. The legacy of Angkor lives on in Cambodian identity, in dance modeled after those apsaras who once adorned the temple walls, in language still laced with Sanskrit echoes, in architecture where even modern pagodas carry the shadow of Angkor's form, and perhaps most powerfully, in the silence of the stone. Because this silence is not emptiness, it is listening, it is memory. The Khmer were not content to simply record history. They carved it into their world. They believed that by shaping stone, they could shape time, that memory itself could be made permanent. And in many ways, they were right. As I stood before that sculpture in the museum, I thought of everything we had uncovered: roads buried beneath jungle, canals dried by time, temples bound in roots, myths frozen in relief, each a chapter, each a whisper. And though the empire is gone, the questions remain. Who were these people who moved mountains? What did they dream of as they placed each stone? And what did they know that we have forgotten? Angkor teaches us that greatness is not always loud. It does not always last in the ways we expect. Sometimes it crumbles, sometimes it vanishes, but sometimes it breathes in stone, waiting, not for discovery, but for recognition, not for restoration, but for understanding. I left the museum with the memory of the Apsara still in my mind, her gesture, her gaze, her unspoken dance, and I realized we are all inheritors of what she represents, not just the ruins, but the resilience, not just the fall, but the grace beyond it. The Khmer Empire may have faded from the map, but its legacy never stopped moving. It moves in the wind that rushes through broken halls, in the footsteps that trace ancient roads, in the breath of stone that still carries the memory of a world both sacred and human. And so we listen. And so we remember. The dust still clung to my boots. The scent of wet stone followed me down from the temples, and the echoes of forgotten footsteps lingered somewhere just beyond the trees. This was not just a journey through ruins, it was a walk through memory. The Khmer Empire was never only about kings or monuments. It was a living world built on rivers and belief, on roads that carried stories, on stones that still whisper even as the jungle leans in. We traced the path from the sacred mountain of Kulen, where a man declared himself God-King, to the vast corridors of Angkor Wat, where architecture reached for the heavens. We stood beneath the faces of Bayon, watched by serene expressions that refused to fade. We listened to roots cradle temples, to silence speak in old canals, to myths carved into walls older than the modern world. And in each fragment, we saw not a fall, but a transformation. Empires rise, they shine, and they fade. But what they leave behind is never only ruin. It is legacy, it is warning, it is beauty. The Khmer mastered water, stone, and story. And though time took its toll through droughts, invasions, and slow decay, their voice endures. In the dance of the Apsara, in the sacred geometry of a temple floor, in the stillness of a road that no longer leads anywhere, but still points forward. In the end, we are not just visitors here, we are inheritors. Of questions left unanswered, of beauty left half-buried, of reminders that greatness is not always measured by what lasts, but by what lingers. And so we walk on, not to find all the answers, but to honor the asking, because history does not whisper, it waits.